And I forget, Chris, are you our official host for this meeting, or is it Emily and me?
I think you guys are the official hosts. I set it up, but certainly
Okay.
am here for whatever you need. So, and I see Mike's here as well. So certainly.
Want me to share it, Dwayne?
I got it here.
Okay.
Does that look like a slide?
Looks good.
Welcome, everybody, and we are being recorded. And this is our little get together with the subcommittee chairs, or most of you, and vice chairs to try to get on the same page about all these rules. And I've actually had an interesting week trying to figure out what these rules are. I've been pestering Chris and Mike with emails about at least every hour. But I think we kind of got it straightened out. I'm sure neither of them is especially shy, so they'll be happy to get me in line if I've still got something wrong. This was my first shot at what the subcommittee's task is. And you can, I'm open as we go forward to modifying that, but it just seemed like a first stab at it. Just deliver a well-considered set of code changes to the main committee. It's cost effective and integrated with other code requirements. Did I nail it there, or do you think it's missing something? Anyway.
Dwayne, it's Michael Chwani.
Yeah.
I thought one of the other objectives is it's that the next version of the code will be more energy efficient than the current version. So isn't that an objective?
Well, I was trying to think of what is the subcommittee objective? What is it that each of you subcommittees is required to do? But yeah, you're right. We're supposed to be better than the previous code. Certain people would like that to be 1% better, and other people would like it to be, more like 25% better. So that'll be interesting. But
maybe if you wanted to, Dwayne, you could just say cost-effective and integrated with the other code requirements, including scope and intent or something like that, which I think would take care of Michael's issue. If you want to just bring in a scope and intent, whether or not this is even going to be memorialized, I don't know, but that may be something to think about if it were to get memorialized.
But more efficient than we started was definitely. I think is definitely a good modification there. Let's see. Come on. So starting into what the you chairs and vice chairs have to do, those first couple things you'll do with Chris, our secretariat, for this committee. So getting the meeting scheduled and set up, work with Chris, and that's going to involve trying your best to avoid conflict with everything else that goes on at ICC, and to the extent we can with things that go on at ASHRAE. So just stepping through there, and by the way, I've kind of got this in a draft handbook for you all, so no need to take any notes. But just typically going over what happened the last time. You're in order to set up this meeting, there will be action items that you have to report back on, and then typically you'll pick out a batch of code change proposals. With that, I'm thinking you probably select a few more than you realistically think you'll be able to get to, in case things go swimmingly well and you get through it, that you won't waste committee time. But we can decide how to deal with that things that aren't handled by the end of the meeting get bumped to the beginning of the following meeting. That's how I'd handle it anyway. And then there'll be an agenda that will go out with Chris's help at least a week in advance, and that'll have everything that's on the agenda, and that'll inform everybody who's on our mailing list what's going on. But in particular, I like to notify proponents that their proposal is coming up, because sometimes with all our email traffic, somebody might not notice. Then you're going to run this meeting and keep it moving. It's going to be challenging in for some of these to keep things moving, but you'll have to do that. And that last bullet is really important. I actually asked Drake Irby, who was, chair for most of the time I've been in the 90.1 committee, for his advice when I got appointed here. And he said, follow all the rules, just like every one of them, be really careful. That way nobody can come back and challenge you later and say, you weren't following ANSI procedures. Just some more duties. Somebody has to be the official note taker and take that seriously and get everything recorded. And decisions about the actual proposals have to get tracked. Some of them you'll be able to decide on in the subcommittee. Others you will send out, to the multifamily. We're going to call them advisory groups, we decided. So the multifamily advisory group, or you're going to send it to the modeling subcommittee, or whatever, and then somehow keep track that went out and it's due back on a certain date, and make sure that's happening. So all that, we'll have this tracking sheet set up, and those all have to get recorded there, what actions have happened, and returned to Chris. It's going to be critical that we not have multiple versions of tracking going on at any one time. We don't have to do letter ballots in subcommittees, but just be aware that when things go to the main committee and go out for public review, they're going to come back and there will be comments to deal with. But get the meeting minutes out as soon as possible. They're not useful if they only get completed, like minutes before the next meeting or something, and highlight what you've resolved that your subcommittee members have to do in there. And then finally, you'll tell the main committee at our next meeting what you have done, and we will go through those and vote on your recommendations, and then we start over. Emily, why don't you tell them about the project team?
All right, so I believe it's in the ICC consensus procedures, there's what they call the project team, and this is remember it's Chris and myself and the 4 subcommittee chairs. So it would be Tom, Shauna, Michael, and Greg. And basically we just meet on an ad hoc basis to discuss any issues that come up. So in the procedures, it's we would meet and make recommendations to the committee on, disposition of any sort of input and public comments. If there's any complex proposals that come through, I'm thinking, ones that touch several subcommittees, we could come up with a plan on, how that can move through. And then if you have someone on your subcommittee that, isn't attending, or you're having any sort of other membership issues, those are things that we can make recommendations to Chris on, whether we need to, I guess, find a replacement or, different things like that. And then the last one is, if we need to partner with other organizations and looking for additional funding and support, I'd say this is sort of outside of the cost issue with PNNL, because we'll I guess I'll meet on that with Dwayne and everyone. Then we can see if there's any organizations to reach out to. They can give us additional support on any sort of questions that we have. So I think as we see what the proposals are and roll through what questions we have, this will start to take a little more formative shape.
And part of the issue with partnering with other organizations will be for ICC to decide politically, what's acceptable and what would look like it would bias the committee in some way. The other subcommittee members, besides you officers, are expected to show up at subcommittee meetings and the main committee on a regular basis. And I know Drake kept strict track of this with ASHRAE 90.1 and would lean on people who were not showing up enough. There's so much work. It really needs people to be there and I'm a little worried about members who are also like CEOs of something or executive directors of organizations and have huge responsibilities. We got to make sure they show up too. And you got to be there. You can't have your coworker Joe sit in for you and vote when it comes time. You got to be there when the vote's happening. And to be responsible, each one of them's got to know what it is that's coming up, which means doing that homework beforehand. You'll find, I'm sure that some of your subcommittee members are very vigilant about knowing what they're talking about, and others will be paging through and reading the proposal as it's coming before the committee. And I don't know what we can do about that. And then each one of them is supposed to do some work. So there's other things besides just showing for those meetings and getting in there for those advisory groups when they have to meet, doing the fact checking internally when there's conflicts about what is reality. There's plenty to do. So we've already had a couple people change employers, and means that they're gone and they can reapply. But meanwhile, we need to appoint somebody else. It'd be great if we had advance notice on that, so we don't end up with empty spots for very long. I presume that this will be interesting, and maybe we could just take a minute with ICC staff here to give us some examples about how we're interpreting matters that have an undisclosed financial, business, or property interest. If you've disclosed your interest, does that mean that you can then participate?
I'll jump on that for a minute and attempt a response. It's obviously easier said than done. Typically, it takes the form of representation. So one of the things that's very important at a subcommittee meeting, as well as a consensus committee meeting, is people know who's representing who. That in many cases, representation speaks for itself. At the same time, you captured the undisclosed financial, business, and property interest. That's something that's built into our code of ethics. It really is, at the end of the day, Dwayne, they're on their honor system. But representation is usually something that I look for. Obviously, the challenge is you've got consultants. So it's Mike Pfeiffer's Excellent Code Consulting Group, and I may have 47 clients. There's no expectation that I identify all 47 clients. But if I've got a client who's hawking insulation, by way of example, and all of a sudden a proposal comes in that's going to, bump from R15 to R6000, I believe there's an expectation that we know that Pfeiffer is tied to that industry. It becomes disclosed. And so where somebody's coming from on their vote. This is really the same language that's in our CP28. It uses the same vernacular. And we've always just told people, be honest, identify who you're representing. There's no mechanism by which something can be challenged by way of somebody says, Mr. Chair, I believe so-and-so is, is not fully disclosing or something like that. Again, it boils down to their ethics, and we rely heavily on that. In terms of meeting time, I wouldn't get bogged down on that in terms of whether or not there's full disclosure. You listen to what the person says, you take it with a grain of salt. And then at the end of the day, if somebody's got a complaint, you know the players. They ain't bashful. We actually saw it on one of, I think it was on the commercial call in the one of the last two commercial calls. There was a challenge to a conflict, and you had I'm not gonna get a names, but anybody who's on the call knows who it is.
Yeah.
And that's the nature of the beast. So I just rely heavily on representation and people being on their honor in terms of in abiding by the code of ethics.
Thanks. These last couple of bits on this slide are important. I think that you as leaders are likely to have somebody emailing you and asking what's the direction you're going to take on this or whatever. And the answer is, I don't know, ask ICC. Except you could probably do it more politely than I do. That will make sure that ICC sort of maintains itself as the one portal. They might then, I'm guessing that Chris and Mike will probably want to ask us, like, you know, what should we, but at least we'll be on one page and we'll have one communication portal.
Yeah, along those same lines, just to give you guys the benefit of some history in the code development process. This was it was a bit egregious, but it in fact occurred. We had people up on the dais, I forget what code it was. They were receiving, committee members were receiving texts during the discussion and the deliberation about issues. And we actually had to build in a statement. You wouldn't think that would occur, but you know what? It's code development. We actually had to build in a caveat or an absolute in CP28 that says the only discussion occurs at a planned meeting of the committee, and you are not to be interacting with the committee in that regard, other than out in the open in a deliberative, transparent, open process, which you've already identified. But yeah, so it takes all kinds.
Right. And kind of on that same line, stuff that we have in draft form that we're bouncing around that isn't officially out yet. That isn't officially out until Chris moves it onto one of our publicly accessible documents. Everything else just has to stay in-house, which I think is really good because it's just poison to have 4 different versions of something floating around in the public. The committees on them, that was things that the members are supposed to be doing. The committees themselves are going to be in this workflow that each, you can like decide what the order of things is and how you're going to group proposals, but each one has to get its consideration. Even the ones that are just blatantly ridiculous still have to be taken, or at least act like it's being taken seriously and follows the procedure that so that everybody sees open, transparent, fair. That you can't challenge it saying, well, this whole thing was biased, even though some people will. We got to do everything to make it look up and up, and we have to listen to, the people say, well, this is going to cost too much, or the other people who say, we can't delay this any longer. The world is falling apart. Everything has to be considered. I think there might be some limits on this, and I'm hoping to avoid that. Remember the scene from the old bad old days when we had 20 people lined up on each side of the microphone, ready to do battle, and goes on for hours and hours of comments. And I'm not sure that in any of those, anything outside of that first half hour was really changed anybody's mind. So somehow gotta follow that line between making sure that all the different points of view gets heard and still getting your work done, because you're gonna have this colossal pile of work. So and in fact, you got to like get through it before our each deadline, because things then will we're going to approve or disapprove a whole bunch of stuff, and then there's going to be all kinds of work to do to get it ready to go out for public comment or get ready to go out for publication. And there are going to be subcommittees that you'll realize when you get started talking about something that, oh, actually, this is a plumbing issue too, you know, so you're going to want to talk to somebody on another committee to work that out. Having somebody appointed that can do shuttle diplomacy might be part of the way, but just as long as that's kept track and everybody knows where things are. My last bullet point there was I think the modeling subcommittee is going to have to interact with an awful lot of stuff as they work it out. So be nice to them, but make sure they're in the loop. So generally, I'm thinking this is the way that things would come in. That good role for the vice chair to introduce what the proposal is briefly in a sentence or something, and then the proponent can say what they're doing and why it's a good idea. Questions from the subcommittee. There has to be participation from people who have, you know, supporting and opposing viewpoints. It was pointed out to me this morning by IECC staff that we got to really make sure that the testifiers who get up to speak say who they are and who they're representing there. I was thinking to avoid the 2 or 3 hour debate scenario, that for big issues, maybe you have supporters make statements up to a certain amount of time, and then opponents make statements up to a certain amount of time. And then before you go on, summarize what happened there, what the biggest points are that are being argued without like deciding on anything. And then I think a straw poll might help, because many times those 2 or 3 hour arguments we had in the bad old days, it ended up, you know, 94% in favor or opposed. You could see that there was never even any hope that the other side was gonna win for all that talk. So this could, you know, then let everybody know where the subcommittee's at before you go on to discuss it more. Still got to hear everybody that has something important to say, but you could that might wrap up the discussion sooner. I thought,
before you go on, maybe we could, I don't know if it's okay to just talk as we go, but
please.
It seems that those time limits, it's going to have to be enforced for everything, I would think, because just the number of proposals that we're going to have and the limited number of meetings, it seems like that's just going to have to be a standing rule that all of the subcommittees and the main committee are going to have to institute. Otherwise, because even on the non-controversial ones, we don't want some guy with his pet project going on for 15 minutes about why it's great, you know? So yeah, I can't foresee that we wouldn't want to set forth time limits ahead of time at the beginning of every meeting, but maybe that's just.
Well, no, it's a really good point, Emily. I found in our city and state code development that with some issues, the conversation can kind of flow back and forth, and sometimes it's complicated and somebody needs more time to explain something. And other issues, it just ends up at loggerheads where it's the equivalent of your schoolyard argument. Is so, is not, is so, is, you know, and that can um, go on a long time. So yeah, you could do time limits for everything, and it might be appropriate to relax that in some situations. I don't know which way to go with that.
I could
Hey,
see
Dwayne.
relaxing it for the subcommittee members themselves, but maybe not the public.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Michael?
Oh, sorry, this is Jack. I was just
Oh.
hoping to interject here. I was really hoping that in addition to our subcommittee, that there could be work groups for some of these issues, work groups formed from the subcommittee
Yes.
that give people a chance to talk it out before coming back to a formal 15-person hearing with a quorum of subcommittee members present for an official vote, in hopes that some of these issues can be sort of teed up. And if somebody needs to speak for 15 minutes about their pet issue, maybe they can do it to a group of 6 people as opposed to a group of 30 people. And, then it becomes much more on point when it gets to the subcommittee. Is that something that we can do within this process?
I think it's a great way to go, where it gets down, especially when it's not, just one of these political things, but it's actually like a technical issue about how you're going to handle, the application of this to existing buildings, or whatever the issue comes up, and it's complicated and it just needs some experts to talk it over for an hour. I think that's a great idea, to just go off and have your own discussion and come back to your subcommittee and say, okay, what we came up, and maybe you've come up with revised language or whatever. Yes, it's a really good way to not burn up all the subcommittee time.
Just technically speaking, that advisory group would still have to be approved by the main consensus committee when we create that. So, there may have to be identifying whatever that particular item is. The chair then brings it back to Dwayne to add as an action item for the next meeting, that we're going to create this work group so that we can flesh out this particular topic area if there wasn't one already sort of in place.
Well, that won't work, Chris, because that would mean it would be a 6 or 8 week round trip, by which time, this thing is all blown past. I've certainly done this in.
The only way around it is to set up standing advisory committees that are, that's what I would suggest then, is just, we're going to set up a standing advisory committee, and then that way we're following the procedure that they've been approved with their scope, and and then that way that can be set up, without having to go back through that process.
That's the problem, is that we don't know until we're in the thick of an issue what the issue is. Something's going to come up, and
I mean, Mike, do you have any other suggestion? But as far as I can see, those advisory groups have to go through it.
Consensus procedures, basically, they treat all subcommittees alike at the end of the day. Even a subcommittee to a subcommittee is still fundamentally a subcommittee. But we may have some opportunities for flexibility in terms of if everybody is in agreement that these groups will take a look at it. My only comment, I like Jack's idea, is don't make it a crutch. Because next thing you know, you remand everything to these task groups, and next thing you know, the subcommittee's got nothing to do. And as important, possibly even more important, it needs to be time specific. You guys got it, deal with it for a week, come back time certain, because next thing you know, we couldn't get it, and a month has passed. So, and then next thing you know, you got all these proposals languishing in a task group of the subcommittee, and then all of a sudden we got the funnel problem. So again, I think we have opportunities. We may be able to work around the issue of going through the particulars for every single thing to be voted on. There may be opportunities. Again, I can't promise you that, but my bigger concern is if you're going to do what Jack is suggesting, which, as you indicated, Dwayne, is a good idea, it's got to be worth it. The juice has got to be worth the squeeze in terms of it. Is it really something that warrants it versus hashing it out? Yeah, it may be hashed out with 15 people, but chances are you know what's going to happen? They're going to hash it out at the task group. And guess what? It's deja vu all over again. It's going to come back to the subcommittee. And then guess what? It's going to be heard again at the consensus committee. Just FYI, we've all seen it happen. Now,
Yeah.
the exception to that is by way of example, when somebody tables something in the code development process. If you got everybody all marching towards the same end game, they've got a goal to coordinate these three proposals by way of example. So it's doable. Let's make it work, but it can't be a crutch, and it's got to come back. It's got to be done expeditiously.
Yep. It is possible to go through a long subcommittee meeting and table just about everything.
Exactly.
In which case you haven't done yourself any favors. We could, our city council here in Seattle has these committees that meet, and they always start off each meeting by saying, actually, this is a meeting of the full city council, but it just happened, this is the urban planning committee work, and so they're all just considered. So it might be that these are just special topic meetings of the subcommittee itself that are set up, and then it's not it's just a group that will not have the full membership there.
Is it possible then for the subcommittee to have a meeting when there's not a quorum present?
Yeah, you
as
can.
long as they're not taking votes. So is this sort of the way around that it becomes a task group of the subcommittee where there's not a quorum, so therefore no decisions are final? Is that?
I think
Okay.
that what the rules say is that if you don't have a quorum present, you can still talk about things, but then they have to be those decisions have to be confirmed by when there is a quorum later.
Correct.
So that
And the challenge there is always going to be, if you're not even close to have a quorum, if you got 4 people, I'm getting to an extreme here, and you continue on, and all of a sudden the 4 decide informally there's tacit approval on something, a way to go. Well, then as soon as you bring the entire subcommittee back, it's, you got the learning curve. Wait a minute, I wasn't there for that discussion. See, you got to be careful. And again, it's all about, you captured in your upfront statement, Dwayne. It's all about doing the right thing, following the process, give everybody their fair shake, and let's move on. So you can still talk about it, but again, are you robbing Peter to pay Paul in that example? I guess we'll find out. We'll find out. And if it gets to be a habit, we don't have a quorum, in my opinion, it's time to revisit the makeup of that subcommittee.
Right. Okay. This top bullet was a little controversial, but in other groups, I've seen this work that to avoid having a long set of people, you have to recognize that you can just say, Bob says this is a good idea if we confine it to only buildings 20,000 square feet and larger, or something like that. And so if it works out in your subcommittee that people can put things in the chat and identify them as something they want to be read out there, that could help. You just have to have someone whose job, and maybe that would be the vice chair, would be checking that and reading out things and because something like that can make things flow faster than having to recognize people and bring them up and unmute them and all that. So it's a tool you could try to use, but not if it actually slows things down instead of speeding things up. Once you've heard from everybody, the subcommittee will need to talk amongst themselves and decide either move the proposal forward as submitted, or as you've modified it as you've been talking, and it would go to the main body of the code, or it'd be part of the glide path, or it'd be its own separate appendix. Or you could just disapprove it, to say this is not going to fly, or you could send it back, say need more information, or I'm encouraging you all to have an internal fact-checking group that can like try to figure out when you have a couple parties who are saying things that are incompatible, what is really going on, so that you can report back to the subcommittee and say, you know, here's the evidence pro and con for this to be true. Like I mentioned in an earlier meeting, I've actually seen this where something was, we had one side saying it was going to be $15,000 and the other saying it was going to be $400 and change. And it's really sometimes hard and very time consuming to figure out which is accurate. So there are different ways you can handle this. And like Mike was just saying, any of the ones that involve another round trip mean you'll have to talk about them again, bring them on the agenda again, and that'll mean you can't deal with the other ones. And finally, for the proposals, interested parties can, you know, anybody can send in evidence. You know, if you're down to like trying to figure out what's true and what's not, you know, you can have people send you stuff that we could post. And really, it might be that many of these things can be, when we're talking about just air barrier tightness stuff, it may be that there's one that's a really good one, but you want to bring in additional ideas from others, you can go ahead and do that internally in the subcommittee. Make your own. And you gotta have a reason statement once there's an action, and it could be just a few words, or it could be something that's more extensive, but the subcommittee's gotta like have for the record why you decided for or against something. There's if something has been decided and then somebody comes back with other updated information, you could vote to reconsider. I thought this was, I think looking at Robert's Rules of Orders, I thought that it needed a 2/3 vote of the subcommittee to bring that back, but maybe just a majority vote is fine. But if the subcommittee is fine with it, you can bring it back and say, you know, this is actually could be one of the great strong points of this system we're setting up here. That you know, remember before you couldn't really fix things because you'd be endangering your proposal if you brought it back to fix some language that was not quite right. You could end up getting the whole thing trashed. Here, you could really bring things back and fix language as you're going along.
We have a few questions, Dwayne.
Good.
Like Michael, you have your hand up.
Yeah, and you kind of answered some of this, Dwayne, but so how should the subcommittee deal with modifications? So I get we can combine related proposals and like make one really good proposal by taking the best of different ones. What about just modifications to a proposal?
Right. Somebody can, on the subcommittee, can make a motion to accept a proposal, or to disapprove one. But also in the discussion part of accepting a proposal, you can say, and we'd like to change 10 years to 15 years in that. And that can, the typical process would be that you'd vote on that modification to it. Say, yeah, okay, 15 years is better, so we'll substitute that for the 10 years, and then it's as modified.
Okay.
Did I get that right, Chris?
Well, and the only thing I was thinking is we probably would need to make sure the proponent is either agreeing or disagreeing with that modification. Like I think in regards to that, we would just need to be clear as far as what the proponent prefers. If they're acceptable to the modification and it stays in their name, otherwise they may wish not to, and then in which case we may create it as a committee proposal. It's the only, you know, as far as how it would move forward.
That's a really good point. A proponent can always withdraw their proposal if they don't like the way it's going. But here we have a chance to bring it back in a modified way through a committee generated proposal.
Yeah, and again, there's ways of doing it too. As far as the modification is suggested, there seems to be an awful lot of consensus. You know, again, take the temperature of the interested parties in addition to the subcommittee members. Hey, this is the way to go. Then you're off to the races. Because if we make it too bureaucratic, and you know, I may regret saying that, but if you make it too bureaucratic, you ain't gonna get nothing done. You know, in our current process, by way of modifications, the proponent can disagree. Dwayne, you could submit a proposal. I can modify the heck out of it. You hate everything that I've done, but if it was ruled in order by the chair, it's fair game.
Right.
So.
All right. We have more questions?
Yes, we do. Jack has two. Does the subcommittee fact-checking work group need to be authorized by a vote of the full committee?
I don't know how we should handle this. And this is just, you know, my own little brainchild that you go out and try to figure out what is reality. But once again, like with those special purpose work groups that we talked about earlier, maybe this could be considered a subcommittee meeting, but it just wouldn't have normal quorum attending.
And then another question for, I guess, either Chris or Mike. Will CDP access be available for the committee to create new proposals or modify existing proposals during this process?
Sooner or later, they will. At the end of the day, everything needs to get into CDP access because that becomes the vehicle by which we ultimately produce the next edition of the code. CDP access talks to what's called our new correlation tool. So by way of example, in 2021, we had all these proposals, we had all these modifications, they're all in CDP access. CDP access talks to the correlation tool. So when it's all said and done, Emily, that's exactly right. It will occur, but we're going to wait until we start putting a whole bunch of stuff into CDP access until the committee has identified, yes, we want to do that. Because otherwise we're going to have, 40% of CDP access. It requires a fair amount of work. And that work is going to be a function of staff. Because right now, public input, everybody's working their magic. Everything is due tomorrow. Committee proposals, tweaks, etc. That's going to be a staff function doing that. So in the interest of not overloading staff with that kind of work, we need to be judicious in terms of when it gets into CDP access. These proposals, as Dwayne indicated, well, they'll still be made public in terms of revisions, but again, at a time frame when they get posted and things like that. So people will have access to see them. So the decision to use CDP access will be judicious because, again, at the end of the day, they got to get in there, but we'll rely on staff to decide when it goes in there.
Yeah, I mean, Dwayne, I think we emailed a little bit about this morning. My thought was if there was a committee proposal, because CDP access won't be open to the public because we don't really have a way of controlling. It's either open or it's not. And
Correct.
so we, if there is a committee proposal, essentially what, we would think it would come through the subcommittee chair, it would get heard. If it gets recommended for approval, then send all of the information that would normally go into CDP access to me or as staff, and then we'll enter it into CDP access, knowing that it looks like it's going to go forward. So I think that's probably the way we would handle it. It'll just run through the secretariat.
Right.
The main vehicle for viewing anything, posted documents, et cetera, will be the website. It will not be CDP access. CDP access has a distinct function in that regard, and that is to receive the proposals themselves.
Can we be given at least Word copies of the proposals then, so that if, for instance, the subcommittee was trying to merge two complicated proposals, we didn't have to start by typing everything, from scratch. We sort of had what was there already.
Yeah, we could certainly.
It doesn't come out of CDP access in Word, so the only way you can do that is basically take the PDF and do a cut and paste into a Word.
I mean, I have access to that kind of stuff too, so
Right.
We could certainly.
We can do it, but we're not gonna spend the time, Jack, if we've got 300 proposals and converting them all to Word.
Understood.
But you could do it on the
You're exactly right. If there's a need for massaging, it's a hell of a lot easier to do something in Word than it is in a PDF file, you bet.
But I think the main thing with committee generated proposals is that yeah, they can start, you know, however you want to start them, but eventually it has to become a legitimate kind of complete proposal and then go into the system and be part of the tracking sheet. And so it's a reasonably heavy lift for the subcommittee to do one of these.
Yeah, nice.
Getting closer to the end here, just want to say that PNNL, if you ever ask them, like they want to like keep damping down our expectations. A handful of proposals is, I think, the way that they said it. So we have to be, the whole committee has to be mindful of when we are going to consider something so critical that we want them to do their whole full cost analysis and energy analysis on one of these. I had an offer from something called the 2050 Institute, the California organization that was willing to do a couple of these. You know, if something especially important was to happen. So there might be others, and we'll have to like work with ICC and figure out how we're going to use those. Not a lot. That's the schedule. So we're going to launch into looking at these as soon as we get them from ICC, and that'll be you chairs and vice chairs are going to be working out how you're going to order these things to make the best progress. My thought is that you should have some batch of proposals to move forward to the main committee. You know, that's not going to be too horrendous, so the main committee can start working on things, but that you also not delay on starting in on the big, hairy, controversial ones. But in July, the main committee has to send everything out, and in starting in October, we're gonna like go through these, go back out to the subcommittees, and we'll have to review and respond to everything, and then make the changes that we think are good. There will be another round for cleanup, and then like 18 months from now, we'll all be able to take a nice rest. So there's some documents online. These other bullet points that don't have any website associated with them, we're gonna like figure out as we go along where we will have things stored, and how we divide up internal only documents from others. I think ASHRAE uses an FTP site for the internal things. You have to have a password to get in and look at stuff. And finally, this is just there's these two things that are each called CP somethings. CP7, we're talking about Council Policy 7. I finally figured out that when somebody says CP 9.1, they mean consensus procedures, paragraph 9.1. But anyway, those two documents are right there. Never mind that the one of them says CP 401-03 because it's actually the link to CP7. But these consensus procedures that Mike finally explained to me a couple hours ago are really what applies to our work directly, and then Council Policy 7 and other policies that are referenced from that are kind of more general for all the committees and the work that ICC does. So we got more questions, right? I saw something floating across the chat.
Yeah, Shauna wrote in. She says, instead of creating subcommittees for some complex proposals, can we just recommend collaboration on items to save time? We would table an item to be time certain for collaborators to come back and present as one voice if possible. There will still be a full conversation, but at least some of the proponents can get together and come forward with one stance. That still leaves it open to others to participate, but some of them have worked together to save time.
So it's an interesting idea, Emily, that and Shauna, that you're talking about people not the committee members or the subcommittee members, but the proponents, various people that have an interest in this and that are otherwise arguing about things could go away and work together on their related proposals and come back to us with something that they all agree on. Yes, that could save a lot of time.
You know, you can kind of start having the meeting, and then you start seeing all the proponents and the opponents, and you see a lot of proponents with the same point of view. They didn't know each other were submitting, because you don't know sometimes till after it's done, right? Who else submitted something the same as you. And so you get there and you start seeing all of these people with the same point of view, but it's getting argued and argued. Can you, to save time instead of 2-hour meeting, even if everybody only had 2 minutes, say, okay, you guys go work on it and come back as one voice and come up with something to save some of that time. I don't know. There was a conversation about creating subcommittees, have it be heard by the subcommittee and then bring it back to this committee. But there's rules about additional committees. Instead of creating new committees, can't we just say, guys, okay, there's this big, huge group of people. Can you go work on it and bring it back to the next meeting? But it has to be time certain when you table something.
No, I like that, Shauna. And in fact, I've done that here in our state procedure, where I've noticed that there were 2 or 3 very closely related proposals coming up on the agenda. And I've written to those 3 people saying, listen, can you guys just get together and see if you could arrive at a single one that you all agree on, instead of having us argue with the whole committee. And lots of times people are perfectly happy with that, to just work with people and iron things out. So I think it's a great idea, and it's something that could be done even before the committee.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to ask you, is if we're setting our own agendas, maybe we could see a bunch of proposals, reach out to them ahead of time to see if they'll work together, and not even put it onto the agenda.
Yes, that's definitely something. That's something that could be, that's something the project team can do in advance as well. So while we're reviewing these proposals, we could identify those and see if the project head is amenable to us. There's all kind of opportunities. If there's anything we can do in terms of getting people to coordinate, consolidate, and correlate in advance and not taking up valuable subcommittee time, that's a good thing. So we definitely have opportunities for that, Shauna. And I don't think we necessarily have to wait until a subcommittee meeting. We do have this project team, and the project team can make these kinds of things. It's actually identified in the council, the consensus procedures, again, following on to what Dwayne was talking about, the CPs here and the CPs over there. It's not a council policy, consensus procedures, but 3.5A under project teams kind of touches upon that exact thing. So there are opportunities for us to do that proactively and not have to wait.
And we'll call that the 3C, the coordinate, consolidate, and correlate groups.
There we go. So there are opportunities, and that's a good thing. That's going to say, and that's going to help. That's going to help streamline the process and make it more efficient. That's a good thing. That's assuming in a perfect world they all come back and they agree. Like, we all know how that works, especially in the world with consultants.
Yeah. So we got more questions up. Emily, were there more things coming across the chat?
No, I don't think so.
Hey, this is Greg Eads. I just raised my hand. I had a couple of quick questions.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Greg.
That's okay. So do we know how many CCPs have been submitted so far?
We saw a number this morning. What was it? Was it like 80 submitted and 260 unsubmitted, something like that? Chris?
Yeah, we're up to 110 submitted. Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay.
Well, that's submitted, and how many unsubmitted?
Yeah, no, I think it was, probably somewhere around 200 unsubmitted ones, which is
So-
still a lot less than where we were last time.
A lot less than 2019.
Okay. And my this for the subcommittee, as far as is the expectation that the chair of a subcommittee would seek out volunteers to be a note taker for the subcommittee?
Correct. Because staff is not going to act
Yeah.
as a secretary, so you're
No,
just.
I didn't think so.
And we're not necessarily naming a secretary for these subcommittees, so just whoever is able to,
Whoever, right.
be a vice chair. Or
Yeah, it doesn't have to be
whoever.
the same. Doesn't have to be the same
Yeah.
person every time, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
But it's certainly something good to get agreement on before your meeting to make sure everything goes smoothly.
Oh, absolutely.
All right, we have a few more hands raised. Michael?
Yeah, for like minor proposals, maybe editorial ones or very subtle changes, can we place proposals like on a consent agenda to be voted on in a one swoop? Or will ICC be doing that, or should the subcommittee?
What you can do is you can collectively, if there's something that's editorial, again, this is another possibility of Chris and or the project team. If it's something that's, basically wordsmithing a couple of words, you can remand it directly to the consensus committee and not even go, there's nothing that says it's got to go through the subcommittee, especially if it's something like that, it's editorial. That may help to expedite it. But at the end of the day, since it was submitted, we want to capture a record of that individual proposal. So we're not going to, we want to know why you agreed with that one. It may be a formality, but so there is no quote consent agenda in that regard.
Okay.
But again, it's editorial. I mean, so you basically, you may have out of 300 proposals, you may have 20 that pass muster as being viewed as editorial in terms of the review. And then they go through the E4C, and they also agree editorial. You document them, you're off to the races.
Okay. And then also on the objectives, Dwayne, I know we talked about be more energy efficient than the current code, but we also want to have something that says no rollback in energy efficiency.
Let me jump in on this because I got into it with somebody on the committee. I don't know if it was Dwayne's committee or JC's committee. The board of directors in the scope and intent says no overall rollbacks. In other words, at the end of the day, the 2024, if somebody's got to do the assessment, typically PNNL, they came up with this last one, was it like 9.4 or something like that? I think it was for residential. So bottom line is the board has told the committees that we need to have a positive increase in energy efficiency. That doesn't mean to say that you can't approve something that actually reduces energy on a given for good reason, as long as there's countervailing proposals that do that. So there's not going to be a litmus test that says, no energy saving, doesn't pass muster. That's not what's intended by the board. The board is talking about in an overall fashion, we increase the energy efficiency.
Okay.
Say one final thing before we close here, we're on the hour, but Emily had to jump to another meeting, Emily Lawrence, but she says, I have to run sorry, just wondering if the 7-day and 14-day notice for agendas and meeting notices are written anywhere. And the answer is no, those are actually 14 and 28-day things that I've just arbitrarily.
No, they actually are.
Yeah, the 14 and 7 are.
7.1
meetings.
7.1 for open meetings. Virtuals are 2 weeks, and 14 and a month is for the in person. 7.1 meetings.
Okay, I've been looking somewhere and saw that it was still at 2 and 4 weeks.
That's what it is. 2 and 4 weeks. Yes.
Not the 7's not there.
Yeah. Okay. With that, I think we're ready to call it a meeting and exit almost exactly on time here.
Great meeting, guys. Great meeting.
We'll end up having an XCOM meeting. Basically, all officers and subgroup committee chairs will kind of make up that committee. We'll talk about as far as work group schedule, because we're pretty much going to have to somewhat dictate a schedule for work groups, just so that we don't have overlaps of different committees across the two committees. There can be some horse trading there on times and so forth, but once we get all of those in place and we have an idea in regards to the number of proposals and so forth, we'll call that committee. We should, again, the deadline's the 20th for those interested parties. So October 28th or 27th, now we'll know residential, and then whatever the next meeting after the 19th will be, the commercial meeting, hopefully, where we'll have those interested party rosters set up then. So just a timeline on those things.
So we wouldn't want to do a first meeting until we have the full list of subcommittee members.
Right. And then we're essentially going to try to set up regular scheduled times for the different subcommittees, just so that we're not running into overlaps with other committees. So, or at least we'll have a set schedule, and if there's a vacancy in a spot, you could certainly fill it. We're just trying to avoid overlaps, along with any ASHRAE particular meeting. So,
Bye, everybody.
Okay.
all right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, bye.